Right now, while you're watching this, there's a decent chance the next video your feed recommends is going to have a blurry orb sitting in the thumbnail. Not a coincidence. Not an accident of the algorithm. Something actually changed a few months ago. Something structural, something you can trace back to an exact date on a calendar, and it's the reason your recommended feed suddenly looks like a UFO convention. You're about to understand exactly why, and by the end of this, you're going to realize the real story isn't the orbs at all. It's the fact that, for the first time in American history, the government itself just became the biggest UFO content creator on the internet, and almost nobody framed it that way until right now. Here's what you need to picture first, because the before matters just as much as the after. For roughly 70 years, UFO content lived inside one very specific lane: grainy footage, anonymous witnesses, unnamed sources, and a permanent asterisk of "we can't actually verify this." That was the entire genre, from the 1950s contactee pamphlets all the way through the shaky night vision clips that used to dominate this space just a few years ago. Mystery, speculation, low production value, and a wall of skepticism from anyone standing outside the fandom. Then, in February 2026, that lane got demolished from the inside. The sitting US administration issued a direct order, not a suggestion, an order, instructing the Department of Defense, NASA, the FBI, and parts of the intelligence community to identify and prepare records connected to unidentified anomalous phenomena for public release. Not leaked. Not pried loose after a decade of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. Released on purpose by the government itself on its own timeline. On May 8th, that order produced its first real output. Roughly 162 declassified UAP records dropped through a brand new government portal built specifically for this purpose, called Pursue. 2 weeks later, on May 22nd, a second batch followed, 222 more files. And then, on June 12th, a third release landed, this one containing the case that's probably already crossed your feed by now. Federal agents near a classified military site, watching an orange orb release smaller red orbs into the night sky. One agent turning to another and asking, "Are you seeing this?" 3 releases, in just 5 weeks, from the actual United States government. That has never happened at this pace, with this level of official detail, in the entire history of American UFO disclosure. And every single content creator covering space, mystery, or conspiracy topics noticed at the exact same moment, because the raw material for dozens of videos was suddenly just sitting there, free, verified, and ready to use. You've probably lived through at least one other UFO moment already. Maybe 2017, when the Pentagon confirmed a secret program had spent years quietly investigating UAP reports. Maybe December 2017's New York Times story about 2 Navy pilots describing an object that, in their own words, accelerated unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Maybe 2021, when the first major unclassified assessment landed on Congress's desk. Those moments were real, and they genuinely mattered, but each one was a single event. A report. A hearing. One story that dominated headlines for a week or two and then quietly faded, because there was nothing scheduled behind it to keep the momentum going. What's happening in 2026 is not a single event, it's a release schedule, a cadence. Content creators can now plan around it, the same way sports channels plan a production calendar around a fixed game schedule, because the files keep arriving on a predictable rhythm, and every single drop comes preloaded with exactly the ingredients a YouTube video needs to actually perform. Named witnesses, specific dates, specific locations, official documents you can screenshot directly onto the screen, and quotes lifted straight from federal case files instead of scraped off anonymous internet forums. Think about what that actually solves for a creator. The single biggest problem with UFO content, historically, has always been credibility. You're one skeptical comment away from your entire video getting dismissed as fake, and that skepticism is usually earned, because so much of this content used to be built on nothing. But when your source is a Pentagon memo, signed by the actual director of the government's own anomaly office, that credibility problem mostly disappears. You're not asking your audience to trust a random YouTuber's interpretation of a shaky video anymore. You're asking them to read a real government document alongside you. That's an entirely different psychological contract with the viewer, and it's a much easier one to earn and keep. Here's where you start to see the actual scale of what's happening, because it's bigger than any one channel or any one video. In the weeks following each release, major outlets, CBS, News Nation, the Associated Press, The Washington Post, Space.com, all ran their own coverage, cutting together supercuts of the newly released military footage for their own audiences. Space.com alone compiled the entire batch of nearly 30 declassified videos from the May release into a single compilation for their channel. That's traditional media, essentially handing independent creators a ready-made library of B-roll, sourced directly from the Department of War, with effectively zero copyright risk, because it's public government footage released specifically for public consumption. And it isn't only the paperwork driving this surge. On the exact same day, the Pentagon dropped its third batch of files in June, a day some outlets nicknamed Disclosure Day. Director Steven Spielberg released a new film built around UFO disclosure themes. That means the recommendation algorithm got hit from two completely different directions on the same 24-hour cycle. Real government files trending in the news category, and a major Hollywood release trending in the entertainment category, both funneling search interest toward the exact same keyword cluster at the exact same moment. That kind of overlap is genuinely rare, and it's precisely the kind of moment that pushes a topic from niche interest for a small dedicated audience to showing up in everyone's feed. Because the algorithm doesn't just reward individually good videos, it rewards topics where search volume is spiking across multiple unrelated categories simultaneously. News searches for UAP disclosure. Entertainment searches for the Spielberg film. Direct traffic to the Pentagon's own public UFO portal, all three spiking in the same narrow window, all three feeding the same underlying recommendation signal, all three telling the algorithm the exact same thing. People want this right now. Here's the detail almost nobody covering this content wave is pointing out, and it's more interesting, honestly, than any orb in any thumbnail. Mick West, one of the most prominent public skeptics researching these cases for years, has been blunt about what he thinks these files actually represent. His assessment in plain terms, most of what shows up as unresolved in these government reports would likely turn out to be ordinary things: aircraft, weather balloons, atmospheric distortion, if investigators simply had more complete data to work with. A lack of information isn't evidence pointing toward aliens. It's just a lack of information, full stop. And here's the twist inside that twist, the part that should genuinely surprise you. The Pentagon's own anomaly office doesn't actually disagree with that framing. Officials have said outright, in their own public statements, that the entire point of these releases isn't to prove anything. It's to let the public examine the same raw evidence investigators have access to and draw their own conclusions from it. That's a fundamentally different goal than disclosure in the dramatic cinematic sense most people picture when they hear that word used in headlines. It's less, the truth is finally coming out, and considerably more, here's our unfinished homework, please look through it with us and tell us what you think. Which means the actual story behind 3 million plus combined views across a handful of these videos isn't proof of anything extraterrestrial at all. It's something almost more interesting if you sit with it for a second, an entire content ecosystem discovering, in real time, that a government transparency initiative can be repackaged into exactly the kind of mystery-driven storytelling that already performs well on this platform. Official footage, real case numbers, real named witnesses, real institutional stakes, without a single creator needing to fabricate a single detail to make the video work. Here's something else worth noticing, because it shows just how far this wave actually reaches. It isn't only new 2026 case files getting attention right now. Older, previously well-documented incidents are getting pulled back into the conversation and reframed for a much bigger audience than they ever had the first time around. Take the 2004 Nimitz encounter, the case involving Navy pilots and an object that behaved, in one pilot's own words, unlike anything governed by normal aerodynamics. That case existed in the public record for over a decade before most people had ever heard of it, largely confined to niche forums and specialist reporting. Now inside this new disclosure wave, it's being recut, re-narrated, and resurfaced constantly, not because new evidence about that specific 2004 case emerged this year, but because the entire genre suddenly has a much larger built-in audience actively searching for exactly this kind of content, and older well-documented cases are the easiest, lowest-risk material to fill that demand with immediately. That's actually a pretty useful thing for you to know as a viewer. When you see an older case resurfacing with a dramatic new title, it doesn't necessarily mean something new was discovered about it. Sometimes it just means a wave of new attention found an old, solid story and gave it a second life, which is a very different thing than a genuine new revelation, even if the packaging looks identical on your screen. So here's the practical thing to actually take away from all of this, the part you can use the next time your feed serves you one of these videos. The reason this genre feels like it's taking over your feed right now isn't because extraterrestrial activity suddenly increased. It's because, for the first time, this entire content category has a reliable, scheduled, credible source feeding it real material on a predictable government timeline, and creators, including channels like this one, are simply the fastest group of people to notice a well-documented, verifiable story and tell it clearly before anyone else does. That doesn't mean every claim you'll encounter inside this wave is true, and it definitely doesn't mean every dramatic thumbnail matches what the underlying document actually says. It means the raw material behind the wave is, for once, genuinely verifiable, which is exactly why it's worth watching this content carefully instead of dismissing it outright as another internet conspiracy trend, and exactly why it's worth staying skeptical of the packaging instead of believing every dramatic headline someone slaps over a real government file. Read past the thumbnail. Check whether the video is actually quoting the document, or just gesturing vaguely at the government while showing you unrelated stock footage. Here's where this actually leaves you. Trends like this one always fade eventually. The release schedule will slow down, the news cycle will move somewhere else, and in a year or two, Disclosure Day will just be a footnote in a Wikipedia article most people never read. But something genuinely unusual happened here that's worth remembering long after the algorithm moves on. A government agency, for the first time in living memory, sat down and put an honest number on its own uncertainty in writing and handed it directly to the public instead of burying it in a classified filing cabinet for the next 50 years. Whatever you personally believe is happening in that sky, the fact that you're able to read the government's own case files about it right now, not a leak, not a rumor, but an actual official release, is new. The files are real. What they ultimately mean is still, genuinely, an open question, one even the investigators themselves haven't closed. And that open question, sitting right there in plain public view for the very first time, is exactly why nobody, including you, can quite stop watching.